Within the diverse and rich tapestry of Christian traditions, certain feasts stand out not merely as liturgical events but as cultural landmarks, vivid symbols of faith, and reminders of God's love. The Feast of Corpus Christi, also known as the Solemnity of the Most Holy Body and Blood of Christ, is precisely such a day. Lacking the vibrant colors of Christmas or the dramatic intensity of Holy Week, this feast possesses a distinct solemnity and quiet reverence, yet it harbors within it a profound depth of faith and a captivating historical narrative. Perhaps many of us, whether Catholic or not, have at least once witnessed or heard of the solemn processions where the Blessed Sacrament is carried through the streets. The vibrant floral carpets, the melodious hymns, and the pervasive atmosphere of reverence can evoke a range of emotions, from curiosity and admiration to deep devotion. But behind this magnificent display, how many truly understand the origins and true meaning of this feast day? The reality is that the story of Corpus Christi is often not fully known and is even sometimes misunderstood. Even for members of the Church, grasping the full theological and historical depth of this feast is not always easy. Have we become so accustomed to the ritual that we have forgotten the story behind it? Have we focused on the outward form and missed the core message? This article is not intended as a judgment or criticism, but rather as a sincere invitation to embark on a journey of discovery. We will travel back in time together, to the turbulent 13th century, to lift the veil of mystery surrounding the origins of the Feast of Corpus Christi, meeting the people who played crucial roles in the formation of one of the Church's greatest solemnities. Through this, we will not only learn about its history but also delve into the theology behind it, reflecting on the meaning of the Eucharist, the heart of the Catholic faith, and discovering what this feast can offer to the spiritual life of each individual in the context of today's modern society. To fully grasp the origins and significance of the Feast of Corpus Christi, we must first immerse ourselves in the world of 13th century Europe. It was an era of profound contradictions, a time simultaneously characterized by intense religious fervor and significant theological debate, the construction of soaring cathedrals alongside widespread poverty, crusading zeal coexisting with burgeoning intellectual life. Understanding this complex and dynamic backdrop is crucial to appreciating the events that culminated in the establishment of one of the Church's most important solemnities, often described as the High Middle Ages, or an Age of Faith. The 13th century saw Christianity permeating nearly every facet of European life. The Church was far more than a religious institution, it served as the central organizing force in society, providing frameworks for education, social welfare, and understanding the cosmos. Monasteries flourished as vital centers of prayer, learning, and manuscript preservation, while the construction of magnificent Gothic cathedrals, such as Notre Dame in Paris and Chartres, reached its zenith, symbolizing the soaring aspirations of faith towards heaven. The rhythms of the agricultural calendar, social customs, and political power were deeply interwoven with Christian belief and practice. However, this era of apparent religious uniformity was also marked by significant intellectual and spiritual ferment. The rediscovery of Aristotelian philosophy, largely transmitted through the work of Arab scholars in Spain and Sicily, presented both opportunities and challenges to traditional Christian thought. Concurrently, the rise of universities in major cities like Paris, Bologna, and Oxford fostered environments of lively debate concerning the nature of God, the intricate relationship between faith and reason, and the proper interpretation of Scripture. This intellectual dynamism gave birth to scholasticism, a rigorous method of theological and philosophical inquiry seeking to synthesize Aristotelian logic with Christian doctrine. Thinkers like Albertus Magnus and his brilliant student, Thomas Aquinas, employed meticulous logical analysis, careful definition of terms, and the structured presentation of arguments and counterarguments, questions, to build comprehensive systems of thought addressing fundamental questions of existence and belief. Central to these scholastic debates, and indeed to the devotional life of the era, was the Eucharist. The doctrine explaining Christ's presence in the consecrated bread and wine, transubstantiation, was formally defined by the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215. Drawing upon Aristotelian categories, it held that while the accidents, outward appearances like taste, smell, texture, of bread and wine remain unchanged, their underlying substance is transformed into the actual body and blood of Christ. Despite this official definition, questions and challenges persisted. Groups like the Cathars rejected the goodness of the material world and thus denied Christ's physical presence, while the lingering influence of figures like Berenger of Tours, 11th century, favored a more symbolic understanding. This context underscored the Church's need for a clear and powerful affirmation of its teaching on the real presence. Simultaneously, new religious movements emerged, most notably the mendicant orders, the Franciscans and Dominicans. Unlike older monastic orders living in seclusion, these friars actively engaged with the world, preaching, teaching, and ministering to the burgeoning urban populations. Saint Francis of Assisi's followers emphasized evangelical poverty, simplicity, and devotion to the humanity of Christ, fostering Eucharistic piety among the laity. Saint Dominic's order focused on intellectual rigor and preaching to combat heresy, with Dominicans like Aquinas becoming key defenders and explicators of the doctrine of transubstantiation. Alongside theological discourse, popular devotion to the Eucharist intensified. The faithful sought more tangible experiences of God's presence, leading to the growing practice of Eucharistic adoration, exposing the consecrated host for veneration. Reports of Eucharistic miracles, where the host reportedly bled or manifested other supernatural signs, circulated widely, further fueling belief in the real presence and creating an atmosphere where such events were anticipated. Pilgrimages to holy sites remained a central aspect of religious life. In summary, 13th century Europe was a complex tapestry of deep faith and intellectual questioning, institutional power and spiritual renewal, doctrinal definition and popular piety. It was a world grappling with how to understand and express the central mystery of the Eucharist. It was precisely within this fertile, dynamic, and sometimes contentious environment, a world primed for a powerful reaffirmation of the real presence, that the specific events leading to the establishment of Corpus Christi would soon unfold. Amidst the fervent piety and complex theological currents of 13th century Europe, the story of Corpus Christi originates not with grand papal pronouncements, but within the troubled heart of an ordinary priest known as Father Peter. Whether he hailed from the bustling Bohemian center of Prague or the northern Italian city of learning, Padua, historical sources differ on this detail, remains uncertain. What is clear is that he was likely a parish priest, dedicated to the spiritual care of common people, rather than a prominent theologian or high-ranking official. Educated in the tenets of the faith, including the challenging doctrine of transubstantiation, and having celebrated Mass countless times, uttering the sacred words of consecration, hoc est enim corpus meum, for this is my body, a profound seed of doubt had nevertheless taken root in his soul, tormenting him deeply. It is important to understand Father Peter's struggle not necessarily as a sign of weak faith, but perhaps as an honest reflection of the era's intellectual and spiritual climate. The intricate scholastic debate surrounding the Eucharist, while aiming for clarity, could also generate uncertainty for those not versed in complex philosophical distinctions. Furthermore, the contrast between the abstract language of theology and the simple, lived faith of parishioners could create a sense of disconnect. His doubt, as described in traditional accounts, manifested in several ways. He grappled intensely with the sensory discrepancy. The consecrated bread and wine looked, felt, and tasted no different than before. This reliance on empirical evidence clashed sharply with the doctrine asserting a change in substance. He also questioned the lack of overt miraculous confirmation, wondering why, if Christ were truly present, every Mass wasn't marked by extraordinary signs. This revealed a deep yearning for tangible proof, a visible assurance of the divine reality. Moreover, observing instances of clerical misconduct, greed and moral laxity among some fellow priests who professed belief yet lived contrary lives, further eroded his confidence. Finally, he lamented an absence of profound feeling, a lack of palpable, emotional connection to the divine during the liturgy, questioning if heaven were truly touching earth. Shouldn't he feel something more? This highlights the growing importance of effective piety, the emotional and experiential dimension of faith, in the 13th century. This crisis was not merely intellectual, it was a deeply personal and spiritual torment that impacted his ministry. He felt like a hypocrite, performing the sacred rites while harboring fundamental uncertainties about their core mystery. This internal conflict plunged him into despair, caught between his duty to his flock and the widening chasm in his own soul. His predicament resonates across centuries, reflecting the timeless human struggle to reconcile intellectual understanding with lived experience and maintain faith amidst doubt. Facing this profound crisis, Father Peter chose a path familiar to medieval Christians seeking solace and divine intervention: pilgrimage. He resolved to journey to Rome, the heart of Christendom, to pray at the tombs of the apostles Peter and Paul. This was more than a physical journey, it was a spiritual quest. Rome held immense symbolic power, and he specifically sought the intercession of Saint Peter, the apostle who, despite his own moments of profound doubt and denial, ultimately became a rock of faith. Perhaps Father Peter saw a kindred spirit, one who understood human weakness but ultimately received divine grace. Underlying this quest was likely a desperate hope for a miracle, a sign from God that would definitively shatter his doubts about the real presence and restore his fractured faith. This decision marked a crucial turning point, a shift from passive suffering to active seeking, setting the stage for the unexpected and transformative events that awaited him in the small town of Bolsena. Long before the Eucharistic miracle that would forever link its name with the feast of Corpus Christi, the Italian town of Bolsena was already a place steeped in profound religious significance. This spiritual depth stemmed largely from the enduring veneration of Saint Christina, a young virgin and martyr whose story, a powerful blend of historical probability and pious legend, resonated deeply with themes of unwavering faith, divine intervention, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil, even in the face of brutal persecution. Understanding Christina and the potent legacy she bequeathed to Bolsena is essential to grasping the context in which Father Peter's doubts would soon be dramatically confronted. Reconstructing the precise historical details of Christina's life is challenging, perhaps impossible. Believed to have lived during the intense Roman persecutions of the late 3rd or early 4th century, our primary knowledge comes from hagiographies, or accounts of saints' lives. These texts were not intended as objective biographies in the modern sense, their purpose was primarily to inspire faith, edify the reader, and illustrate theological truths through often symbolic narratives and extraordinary events. While a historical young woman named Christina likely suffered martyrdom for her faith near Lake Bolsena, the specific details of her traditional story must be understood within this hagiographical framework, where truth often lies on a deeper, symbolic level. The traditional narrative presents Christina as the daughter of a wealthy and influential pagan Roman official, Urbanus. Rejecting her privileged background, she converted to Christianity and, in a pivotal act, reportedly destroyed her father's gold and silver idols, distributing the precious materials to the poor. This act of iconoclasm, symbolizing her rejection of false gods and embrace of Christian charity, enraged Urbanus, setting in motion a harrowing series of tortures. These ordeals, as recounted in her legend, are a symphony of symbolic suffering. She miraculously survives scourging, torture on the wheel, being cast into a fiery furnace, echoing the book of Daniel, a pit of venomous snakes, and even having her tongue cut out, yet continuing to praise God. Each miraculous survival demonstrated God's power protecting the faithful against the instruments of evil. The climax of her ordeal, and the most enduring element of her legend, is the miracle associated with Lake Bolsena. Thrown into the lake bound to a heavy millstone, she did not sink but miraculously floated upon the stone, which, according to tradition, retained the imprint of her footprints. This event is laden with symbolism. The water intended for death becomes a source of life, evoking Christian baptism and the triumph over death itself, prefiguring Christ's resurrection. The stone with her footprints became a tangible relic, a physical link connecting believers across centuries to this sacred event and serving as a powerful testament to God's intervention. Though her father reportedly died in shock after witnessing this, Christina's own martyrdom by arrows soon followed, cementing her status as a witness, martyr, to the gospel. Christina's life and death profoundly shaped Bolsena. The town became a major pilgrimage destination, with the faithful flocking to venerate her relics, especially the stone, housed in the church of Santa Cristina, seeking healing and intercession. Bolsena gained a reputation as a place where miracles happened, where the divine touched the earthly. When Father Peter, burdened by his doubts about the real presence, arrived in Bolsena on his pilgrimage, he stepped into a community saturated with the memory of Saint Christina and an ingrained expectation of the miraculous. The very stones of the church dedicated to her seemed to echo with stories of unwavering faith confirmed by divine signs. The stage was perfectly set, the spiritual atmosphere charged, for an extraordinary event that would resonate with this pre-existing legacy of faith. The pivotal moment in Father Peter's journey, and indeed in the history of Corpus Christi, arrived unexpectedly. Weary from his travels and still wrestling with his profound doubts, the priest likely sought only rest and prayer upon arriving in Bolsena. However, according to tradition, he was approached by a young local boy, sometimes identified as Giovanni, or Gio, who persistently requested that Peter celebrate Mass for the community at the Church of Saint Christina. Whether driven by youthful piety, his mother's insistence, or simply the need for a priest, this seemingly chance encounter proved to be a divinely ordained interruption to Peter's solitary quest. He entered the Church of Saint Christina, a space already vibrating with centuries of devotion to its miracle-working patron saint. Frescoes might have depicted her trials and triumphs, pilgrims undoubtedly venerated the stone bearing her legendary footprints. For Father Peter, stepping up to the altar in this particular church, a place where the miraculous felt almost tangible, must have intensified his internal conflict. As he began the Mass, the familiar Latin words would have resonated with unnerving poignancy. In troibo ad altar Dei. I will go unto the altar of God, approaching the place of sacrifice while doubting the reality of that sacrifice. The Confiteor, the confession of sins, likely became a moment of intense self-reflection on his lack of faith. Hearing the epistle reading from St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, recounting the institution of the Eucharist, "For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you," must have felt like a direct address to his troubled heart. The tension likely mounted as he prayed the offertory prayers, Sesipe, Saint Pater, receive, O Holy Father, offering the simple bread and wine he struggled to believe could become Christ's body and blood. Then came the apex of the liturgy, the Eucharistic prayer. As Father Peter, holding the host, pronounced the sacred words of consecration, reenacting Christ's actions at the Last Supper, Hoc est enim corpus meum, for this is my body, the unimaginable occurred. Before his very eyes, the consecrated host began to bleed. This was not a subtle stain or symbolic discoloration. Accounts describe a dramatic, visible, undeniable flow of rich, red blood. It spilled onto his trembling hands, stained the white linen corporal, the cloth upon which the host rested, and, according to some traditions, even dripped onto the marble altar steps below. The miracle was a direct, physical, sensory confirmation of the very doctrine his senses had caused him to question. It was a rupture in the fabric of ordinary reality, a visible sign shattering the invisible barrier of his doubt. Overwhelmed by a tumultuous mix of awe, fear, relief, and profound gratitude, Father Peter was reportedly unable to continue the Massachusetts. Tears streamed down his face, tears no longer of despair, but of astonished faith reborn. The atmosphere in the small church was instantly electrified. Young Giovanni, who had perhaps attended Mass out of obligation, became an ecstatic witness to divine proof. Other parishioners reacted with a mixture of reverent awe and, for some like the character Gemma mentioned in certain accounts, fearful uncertainty, wondering if this sign was one of judgment rather than grace. This spectrum highlights how even miracles can evoke complex human responses. Even some clergy, upon hearing the news, were initially skeptical, demanding verification. Shaken but resolute, Father Peter knew he could not keep this event to himself. His immediate response was one of humility and responsibility. Recognizing the miracle's significance extended far beyond his personal crisis, he felt compelled to report it to the highest authority, Pope Urban IV, who was residing in the nearby city of Orvieto. Carefully wrapping the blood-stained corporal, now a sacred relic, he interrupted his original pilgrimage to Rome. This new journey, carrying the tangible evidence of the miracle, was no longer a solitary search for answers but the urgent mission of a witness bearing a divine message to the heart of the Church. The news inevitably spread like wildfire, preceding him to Orvieto, setting the stage for an encounter that would forever change the liturgical landscape of Catholicism. While the dramatic miracle of Bolsena provided the immediate catalyst for the establishment of Corpus Christi, the theological and spiritual seeds for this great feast had been sown years earlier through the mystical experiences of a devout Belgian nun, Juliana of Liège, also known as Juliana of Cornelin. Her story serves as a compelling testament to the power of visionary experience, the importance of perseverance in faith, and the often hidden, providential ways seemingly disparate events can converge to shape the course of Church history. Without Juliana's heavenly mandate, the Church might not have been receptive to the message of Bolsena, born around 1191 or 1192 near Liège in present-day Belgium. Juliana was orphaned at a young age. She and her sister Agnes were entrusted to the care of Augustinian nuns at the convent and leprosarium of Montcornelin. This environment, dedicated to both contemplative prayer and the compassionate service of those afflicted with leprosy, profoundly shaped Juliana's spiritual development, exposing her simultaneously to human suffering and divine grace. From her youth, she exhibited an extraordinary devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, spending countless hours in prayer before the Eucharist, experiencing a deep sense of Christ's presence. Juliana did not rush to publicize this extraordinary vision. Demonstrating remarkable prudence and humility, she spent nearly 2 decades in prayerful discernment, seeking to fully understand the vision's meaning and God's will, while also fearing potential misunderstanding or rejection. She eventually confided in a few trusted individuals, including a devout laywoman, Blessed Eva of Liège, and Dominican friars. However, the most crucial confidant proved to be Jacques Pantaleon, then the respected and learned Archdeacon of Liège. He took Juliana's account seriously, recognizing the potential divine origin of her vision, and offered his crucial support, encouraging her and lending his credibility to the cause of establishing the requested feast. Initially at a local level in Liège, despite Pantaleon's backing, Juliana faced considerable opposition. The idea of adding a new feast encountered resistance from those questioning the vision's authenticity, others wary of altering the established liturgical calendar, and perhaps some uncomfortable with heightened focus on a doctrine still subject to theological debate. Juliana endured criticism, ridicule, and eventually was even forced to leave Montcornelin, living out her later years in relative obscurity. Juliana died in 1258 in Fosses-la-Ville, having seen the feast celebrated locally in Liège but never its universal institution. For a time, her vision seemed destined to fade. Yet, Providence had other plans. The connection between Juliana's long-held vision and the startling miracle at Bolsena, though separated by years and geography, would become undeniable when Archdeacon Jacques Pantaleon ascended to the papacy as Urban IV. He remembered the devout nun from Liège and her persistent heavenly request. Juliana's vision had provided the theological rationale and identified the liturgical need. The miracle at Bolsena would provide the undeniable sign and immediate impetus for the Pope to act, bringing her divine inspiration to fruition for the entire Church. The relatively short papacy of Urban IV, 1261 to 1264, proved pivotal in the history of Eucharistic devotion, primarily through his decisive action in establishing the Feast of Corpus Christi. This decision was not made in isolation but represented the convergence of several crucial factors: the recent, startling miracle at Bolsena, the lingering memory of Saint Juliana's persistent vision, the ongoing theological necessity to affirm the real presence against challenges, and the broader context of 13th-century piety. The man who became Urban IV, Jacques Pantaleon, was uniquely prepared for this moment. Born of humble origins in Troyes, France, he rose through the church hierarchy based on his considerable intellect and administrative skill. Having studied theology and canon law at the University of Paris. Significantly, during his time as Archdeacon of Liège, he had personally encountered Juliana and become familiar with her divinely inspired request for a feast honoring the Eucharist. Elected Pope in 1261, somewhat unexpectedly as he was not yet a cardinal, Urban IV inherited a church grappling with significant challenges, including political conflicts with the Holy Roman Empire, the Hohenstaufen dynasty, the persistent threat of heresies like Catharism, and internal divisions. Into this complex scenario arrived the news from Bolsena. When Father Peter reached Orvieto, presenting the blood-stained corporal as evidence of the Eucharistic miracle he had witnessed, Pope Urban IV, possessing both theological acumen and prior knowledge of Juliana's vision, immediately grasped the potential significance. However, demonstrating the Church's characteristic prudence regarding supernatural claims, he did not simply accept the account at face value. He commissioned a thorough investigation, appointing a team of esteemed theologians to travel to Bolsena, meticulously examine the physical evidence, the corporal and altar stains, interview Father Peter and other witnesses, and assess the overall context. Tradition holds that this commission included two towering intellectual figures of the age, the Dominican Saint Thomas Aquinas, a foremost proponent of scholasticism and defender of transubstantiation, and the Franciscan Saint Bonaventure, a theologian known for his integration of mystical experience and effective piety. Their involvement ensured a comprehensive and balanced evaluation. The investigation concluded unequivocally: the miracle was authentic, deemed a genuine sign from God. For Pope Urban IV, this confirmation was the final, decisive piece. He clearly saw the convergence. Juliana's vision years earlier had articulated the need for such a feast. Identifying a perceived gap in the Church's liturgical homage to its central mystery, the miracle at Bolsena now provided the powerful, tangible impetus and divine confirmation. Recognizing this as a providential moment, Urban IV felt compelled to act upon the heavenly request Juliana had championed and which God seemingly now underscored with a miracle. In 1264, Pope Urban IV issued the landmark papal bull Transituris de hoc mundo, regarding the transition from this world, referencing Christ's passage to the Father and the institution of the Eucharist before his Passion. This document officially established the solemnity of Corpus Christi as a universal feast for the entire Latin Church. The bull eloquently articulated the theological foundations, firmly reaffirming the doctrine of the real presence against heretical challenges and explicitly citing the Bolsena miracle as a divine sign. It outlined the feast's purpose: to render thanks for the immense gift of the Eucharist, to strengthen faith in this central mystery, to make reparation for any irreverence shown towards the blessed sacrament, and to provide a dedicated occasion for joyful and solemn celebration. The bull mandated its observance on the Thursday after Trinity Sunday, deliberately linking the celebration of Christ's body and blood to the feasts of the Trinity and Pentecost. To ensure the new feast was endowed with fitting liturgical prayers and hymns, Urban IV entrusted the task to St. Thomas Aquinas. It was a masterful choice. Aquinas, with his profound understanding of Eucharistic theology and extraordinary poetic gifts, composed texts that became masterpieces of the Church's liturgical heritage, including the sequence Lauda Shaun Salvatorum, and the beloved hymns Pange Lingua Gloriosi, whose final two stanzas form the Tantum Ergo Sacramentum, Sacris Solemnius, containing the famous Panis Angelicus section, and the deeply personal Adoro te Devote. These compositions are not mere devotional poetry, they are theological treatises set to verse, profoundly shaping Catholic understanding and expression of Eucharistic faith for centuries. Thus, through the vision of a humble nun, the doubt of a struggling priest, a startling miracle, the decisive action of a discerning pope, and the genius of a saintly theologian, the feast of Corpus Christi was born, a testament to the enduring mystery and centrality of the Eucharist in the life of the Church. Pope Urban IV's institution of Corpus Christi in 1264 marked the beginning, not the culmination, of the feast's journey into the heart of Catholic life. The initial official celebration took place in Orvieto, Italy, where the Pope was residing and where the precious relic of the blood-stained corporal from Bolsena was now housed. This first observance significantly shaped future traditions. Its centerpiece was a solemn Eucharistic procession, likely the first of its kind on such a scale, where the miraculous corporal was carried reverently through the city streets, accompanied by the Pope himself, cardinals, clergy, and the faithful. This act established a powerful precedent. Corpus Christi was to be a feast not confined within church walls but one that brought the mystery of the Eucharist into the public square, a visible, communal declaration of faith in the real presence of Christ journeying with his people. Despite the papal mandate, the adoption of Corpus Christi across Christendom was not instantaneous but gradual, unfolding over several decades. Some initial resistance likely stemmed from practical concerns about adding another major feast to an already dense liturgical calendar, while perhaps others still harbored theological reservations or questioned the necessity beyond the Holy Thursday commemoration. However, the unwavering support of subsequent popes proved crucial in encouraging its observance. Furthermore, the burgeoning popular devotion to the Eucharist, significantly bolstered by the compelling story of the Bolsena miracle and the widespread appeal of St. Thomas Aquinas's newly composed hymns and prayers, created a groundswell of support from below. The Council of Vienne, 1311–1312, formally confirmed the feast and strongly urged its universal adoption, and later decrees by Pope John XXII in the early 14th century effectively cemented its place throughout the Western Church. By the late Middle Ages, Corpus Christi had evolved into a major solemnity, celebrated with elaborate rituals and great popular enthusiasm. The celebration of Corpus Christi traditionally revolves around three core liturgical and devotional elements. The Mass of Corpus Christi. As always, the Mass is the central act of worship. On this day, the liturgy is specifically tailored to focus on the profound mystery of the Eucharist. The scriptural readings, prayers, collect, preface, etc., and particularly the sequence, Laude Achaun by Aquinas, delve into the theology of the real presence, sacrifice, and communion. Aquinas's other hymns, like Pange Lingua, often feature prominently, adding to the solemnity and theological depth. Eucharistic adoration, extended periods of adoration before the Blessed Sacrament, typically exposed in an ornate vessel called a monstrance, are a common feature. This practice allows the faithful quiet time for personal prayer, contemplation, and deepening their intimate relationship with Christ truly present before them. The Eucharistic procession. This remains the most distinctive and visually striking public ritual associated with Corpus Christi. The consecrated host, enshrined within the monstrance, is carried in a solemn procession through the streets of towns and cities. Usually led by a cross-bearer and acolytes with candles, the procession includes clergy in liturgical vestments, members of religious orders, confraternities, and large numbers of the laity, often singing hymns, reciting prayers like the Rosary, or walking in silent reverence. The procession is rich in symbolism. It signifies Christ's presence sanctifying the world. The Church as a pilgrim people following their Lord, a public witness of faith to the wider community, and the bestowal of divine blessings upon the places through which it passes. Key visual elements typically include the monstrance itself, often carried under a decorative canopy signifying sacredness, billowing incense, banners, music, and frequently, the joyous ringing of church bells. While these core rituals provide a unifying structure, the celebration of Corpus Christi also showcases remarkable cultural diversity, with numerous regional variations reflecting local customs and artistic expressions. Perhaps the most famous is the Infiorata in Italy and other regions, where streets along the procession route are adorned with intricate and stunningly beautiful carpets made entirely of flower petals, often depicting complex religious scenes. In Seville, Spain, the unique tradition of the Seizes involves young boys performing a centuries-old solemn dance before the Blessed Sacrament in the cathedral. In some coastal areas, processions even take place on decorated boats, invoking Christ's blessing upon the waters and livelihoods dependent on them. Elsewhere, communities erect temporary, beautifully decorated altars, estaciones, outside homes or businesses, where the procession pauses for prayer and benediction. These diverse traditions highlight the feast's capacity for cultural integration and the boundless creativity inspired by devotion to the Eucharist, making Corpus Christi a living bridge connecting universal faith with local identity, past with present. The Feast of Corpus Christi transcends mere historical commemoration or colorful pageantry. It stands as a profound theological declaration and a potent cultural force that has deeply influenced Western civilization and the spiritual lives of countless believers for over 7 centuries. To appreciate its full weight requires delving into both its core doctrinal affirmations concerning the Eucharist and its remarkably wide-ranging impact on art, architecture, music, literature, and societal values. At the absolute heart of Corpus Christi lies the foundational doctrine of the real presence, the Catholic belief that Jesus Christ himself, body, blood, soul, and divinity, is truly, substantially, and enduringly present under the appearances of the consecrated bread and wine. This is not understood as a mere symbolic presence, a spiritual remembrance, or a subjective feeling, but the objective reality of Christ offering himself. The feast was established precisely to celebrate and emphatically reaffirm this central tenet of faith, particularly in response to historical doubts and challenges. The Church's official explanation for how this mysterious transformation occurs is the doctrine of transubstantiation. Formulated using the philosophical language of Aristotle, it distinguishes between the invisible underlying reality, substance, of a thing and its perceptible outward properties, accidents. In the Eucharist, the substance of the bread and wine is miraculously changed into the substance of Christ's body and blood, while the accidents, taste, texture, smell, appearance, remain unchanged. While acknowledged as a profound mystery exceeding full human comprehension, this doctrine provides the theological framework for understanding the real presence celebrated on Corpus Christi. Beyond Christ's presence, the Eucharist is also understood as a sacrifice. It is the sacramental representation, the making present again, of Christ's one, perfect, and eternal sacrifice offered on the cross at Calvary for the redemption of humanity. It is not a repetition of the sacrifice, but a participation in its timeless efficacy. Corpus Christi, therefore, celebrates not only Christ's abiding presence among his people but also the enduring power of his saving act of self-giving love. Furthermore, the Eucharist is the ultimate sacrament of communion. Primarily, it unites the believer intimately with Christ himself. Secondarily, but inseparably, it unites all who partake worthily with one another, building up the mystical body of Christ, the Church. Corpus Christi, especially through its public processions, vividly expresses this communal dimension, taking the sacred mystery out from the church building and into the community, signifying Christ walking among his people and uniting them as one. Finally, the Eucharist is revered as essential spiritual nourishment, the bread of life, and food for the journey, viaticum, that strengthens believers spiritually for their pilgrimage through life towards eternity. As the Second Vatican Council declared, the Eucharist is the source and summit of the Christian life, the central point from which all other sacraments and church activities draw their meaning and towards which they are directed. Corpus Christi powerfully highlights all these theological dimensions. This profound theology has radiated outwards, exerting a significant and lasting cultural impact. The intense focus on the real presence spurred incredible creativity in art and iconography. Ornate monstrances, vessels designed to display the consecrated host for adoration and processions, became masterpieces of goldsmithing, often lavishly adorned with precious metals and jewels, reflecting the perceived infinite value of what they contained. Countless paintings emerged depicting Eucharistic themes: the Last Supper, the Miracle of Bolsena, famously captured by Raphael in the Vatican stands, scenes of adoration, and saints known for their Eucharistic devotion, like Clare of Assisi or Thomas Aquinas. Sculptures similarly reflected this focus, adorning churches and chapels. Architecture was also profoundly influenced. The magnificent Orvieto Cathedral, a stunning example of Italian Gothic, was specifically commissioned and built on a grand scale to fittingly house the sacred relic of the Bolsena corporal. More broadly, the emphasis on the real presence reinforced the centrality of the altar and the tabernacle, where the Eucharist is reserved, as the focal point of Catholic Church design. Music saw immense enrichment through Corpus Christi. The hymns composed by St. Thomas Aquinas specifically for the feast's liturgy, Lauda Shaun, Pange Lingua /Tantum Ergo, Sacris Solemnius /Panis Angelicus, Adoro te Devote, are considered unparalleled masterpieces, weaving intricate theology with poetic beauty. They have resonated through centuries of worship and inspired countless other composers to create Eucharistic motets, cantatas, and masses. The theme of the Eucharist permeates Christian literature, from the writings of the early Church Fathers to modern works. The story of Bolsena itself has inspired reflection on faith, doubt, and divine intervention. Moreover, the feast profoundly shaped social and cultural identity in many Catholic regions. Corpus Christi processions became major civic events, reinforcing community bonds and expressing a shared faith heritage. Traditions like the Italian Infiorata, the creation of ephemeral yet stunningly intricate flower carpets, represent a remarkable fusion of popular piety, artistic expression, and communal effort dedicated to honoring the passing Eucharist. In some places, the feast is combined with celebrations of local patron saints, further intertwining faith with local identity. In increasingly secular societies, the very public nature of Corpus Christi processions can stand as a powerful, countercultural statement of faith. Ultimately, the impact of Corpus Christi extends far beyond the tangible artifacts of art and architecture. It has shaped how Catholics perceive the sacred, fostered community cohesion, inspired immense creativity, and provided a powerful framework for expressing devotion to what they believe is Christ's enduring, loving presence in the Eucharist, taken from the altar out into the very heart of the world he came to redeem. The Feast of Corpus Christi, born in the deeply religious milieu of the 13th century, navigates a vastly different landscape in the 21st. While its core theological message, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, remains unchanged, the cultural and intellectual context has undergone a profound transformation. This presents both significant challenges to its traditional expression and unique opportunities for its continued relevance. The dominant challenge, particularly in historically Christian Western societies, is pervasive secularization. This involves not just declining religious affiliation but a broader shift where religion is often relegated to the private sphere and public expressions of faith, like traditional Corpus Christi processions, can seem unintelligible or out of place to many. The rise of the religiously unaffiliated, the unknowns, especially among younger generations, coupled with increasing cultural and religious pluralism, can foster a relativistic outlook that questions the specific, unique claims of Catholic Eucharistic doctrine. In a world saturated with distractions, capturing attention for purely spiritual realities also becomes increasingly difficult. The challenges are not solely external. Within the Catholic Church itself, changing patterns of practice and belief impact the feast's reception. Declining Mass attendance in many regions means fewer Catholics regularly encounter the Eucharist and the teachings surrounding it. Furthermore, surveys consistently indicate that a notable percentage of self-identified Catholics do not fully grasp or assent to the specific doctrine of transubstantiation, even if they hold a general belief in Christ's presence. This highlights an ongoing need for effective catechesis and finding ways to articulate this profound mystery, distinguishing perhaps between the core belief in the real presence and the specific philosophical explanation, in ways that resonate today. Internal debates regarding liturgical practices following the Second Vatican Council can also sometimes overshadow the unifying potential of the feast. Despite these hurdles, Corpus Christi continues to be celebrated, often with creative adaptations that seek to maintain its essence while engaging the contemporary world. While grand processions through major city centers may be less common or feasible due to traffic, logistics, and participation levels, many communities find meaningful alternatives. Processions might be shorter, follow modified routes, or be contained within church grounds. In some parishes, there's a greater emphasis on the solemn celebration of the Mass itself, followed by extended periods of Eucharistic adoration within the church, fostering a more contemplative and perhaps less confrontational public witness. Technology offers new avenues. Live streaming Masses and adoration allows the homebound or distant faithful to participate virtually, while online platforms provide resources for learning and devotion. Some communities use the occasion for ecumenical or interreligious dialogue, focusing on shared values of reverence, sacred meals, or service, while respecting distinct theological understandings. Increasingly, parishes connect the celebration of Corpus Christi to social justice, drawing a powerful link between the Eucharist as Christ's body broken for the world and the Christian imperative to serve the poor, marginalized, and suffering, the broken bodies in our midst. This might involve organizing processions through areas marked by poverty or social need, or coupling the feast with service projects. Efforts are also underway to engage youth more effectively, incorporating contemporary music into adoration, utilizing social media, or empowering young people to lead aspects of the celebration. these adaptations demonstrate the resilience of Corpus Christi. It is not merely a static relic but a living tradition capable of evolution while striving to remain true to its fundamental purpose, celebrating and proclaiming faith in Christ's enduring, loving presence in the Eucharist. The ongoing challenge lies in finding authentic and compelling ways, both traditional and new, to communicate this profound mystery in a world that often struggles to perceive the sacred. Doing so without diluting the integrity of the Church's teaching. Corpus Christi, therefore, continues to extend its ancient invitation, to encounter, adore, and receive the living Christ, truly present in the Blessed Sacrament, as nourishment and hope for the journey of faith in every age.